Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the world to the Enlightenment podcast. There is a lot to talk about in general, especially at this time. We are putting our focus on Palestine. Hanan and I feel it's important to have a dialogue on Palestine, a subject close to our hearts, to build awareness, to foster understanding through facts, through dialogue, and to give some context and reach, obviously, as many people as possible. Today's episode delves into the historical and ongoing massacres of Palestinian people by Zionist forces, a narrative that we think it's important to explore because it reveals the continuous erasure and systematic erasure of the Palestinians through violence. Hanan, should we start with a quick recap of what we've covered so far because it kind of leads in?
Yeah, definitely, Shamim. So, in past episodes, we've covered many subjects from Palestinian generational trauma to Arab, Jews, and Jewish communities living in the Muslim world in countries like Turkey and Iran, where there's still Jewish people living today.
Yeah, and we also touched on Christian Zionism, on Jewish Zionism, on the events leading up to the Balfour Declaration, which led the way to the UN's decision, paved the way for the UN to partition Palestine. And it's crucial in all of this recap of history to remember that Zionism is a very distinct thing. It's a political movement, and it's not to be conflated, in our opinion, with Judaism.
Absolutely, Shamim. And the heart of Zionism is really a settler colonial movement that began in the late 19th century, and it was aimed at establishing a Jewish state, which meant the killing and the displacement and the expelling of Muslim and Christian Palestinians, the indigenous people of the land, and the outright theft of Palestinian homes and lands.
Yeah, as happened, in fact, in your mom's case, Hanan, in Jerusalem and in Haifa in 1948. Her house and home was stolen. And these expulsions by Zionists forced over 750,000 Palestinians um, during the 1948 Nakba or catastrophe. It forced them from their homes, from their land. And again, during the 1967 Naksa, with over 350,000 more Palestinians expelled from their homes and land.
Yeah, and we also highlighted the apartheid conditions under which Palestinians continue to live, and their struggle against the Zionist ideology, not against the Jewish people. And this ideology has fostered discrimination against Palestinians and even Palestinians who are Israeli citizens since 1948.
Yeah, and we had a whole episode on apartheid, and we touched on it with your cousin, Dr. Victor Katan, who's a legal expert last week. And the crime of apartheid is punishable under international law. It's recognized as a crime against humanity. And we also talked about racial segregation and unlawful Israeli apartheid and how Israel's occupation violates the basic laws of self-determination.
Very much so. And self-determination really is the right of Palestinians to exist as a sovereign people. Um, and just to say, the Zionist settler colonial project was created on top of Palestine, which forced displacement, trying to eradicate the Palestinian identity and culture. It's not a land without a people for a people without a land. It was really on top of Palestine and Palestinians. And really, like most indigenous people, the land is a very important part of your own identity, and it's who you are as as an indigenous person, and it's about the love of your ancestral land. It's deeply rooted in the culture and the identity of the Palestinian people. So I think people don't understand the importance of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, it's an incredible culture and it's one that is being erased and appropriated in some instances as well. But that's another story, maybe for another week. Let's delve into this
Yeah,
week.
sorry, the hummus and the falafel wars, absolutely.
Hummus wars coming soon. But let's delve into this week's topic. Hanan, can you explain a little bit about how the Zionist terror groups, which acknowledged as terror groups by the British, amongst others, at the time, uh, which later actually turned into the Israeli army, the IDF as it's called today, the IOF as we like to call it, played a role. How did these groups play a role in the escalation of violence? And to my mind, a recurring pattern of dehumanization of the Palestinian population and a kind of incremental genocide or erasing of a population over years that has led to what we now see as a much more open mass killing and genocide in Gaza.
Yeah. Well, really, it's as early as the 1920s, Zionist terror groups carried out sort of mass attacks, killings of Palestinians, and they continued their escalation and their violence against across Palestine. And these terrorist activities included detonating bombs in crowded places, marketplaces, on buses, on trains. So it was really pure terror against civilian people. And these killings and these massacres became a common Zionist terror tactics used against the Palestinians throughout, yeah, from early on.
Yeah. And it's also surprising how few people realize or seem to know that between 1947 and 1949, the Zionist groups, which became part of the Israeli army, destroyed over 530 villages, Palestinian villages, killing upwards of 15,000 Palestinians just in that one period.
Mm. Yeah, and these acts were really a part of a broader strategy to ethnically cleanse Palestine and massacre and to create a Jewish majority. And that was formalized in May 1948
Yeah.
when Israel was established. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And there's an Al Jazeera article that I read from 2017, which cites that apart from the ethnic cleansing and the destruction of villages that I just mentioned, 70 separate massacres took place. It's hard to quantify these, but that was from that Al Jazeera article during that time. So,
Yeah.
and I'm defining massacres here as the killing of people who are not engaged in hostilities and who are defenseless. And we are talking about it now because it is not an act of self-defense, which is often the story given by the Zionists.
Yeah, and really these genocidal acts and the mass killings, we're seeing it happening now in Gaza and the West Bank and Lebanon, sadly. And it's showing us that history really repeats itself. So the destruction of the Palestinian people continues under the guise of self-defense.
Yeah, it's very clear that self-defense does not require genocide because a genocide that targets women, children, unarmed men. And it's very clear under international law. That's not my opinion. It's an international legal opinion. And there is a very distinct distinction under international law between civilians and combatants. And I think we know that 70% of the dead in Gaza are women and children. There are a lot more who are men who have nothing to do with anything too. But let's just stick with the women and children. They are not combatants. They are civilians.
Yeah. And also, just to be clear, this is not a state against a state conflict. It's an occupying power assaulting the people who are occupied, the Palestinians. And people seem to forget that. And these Palestinians have the right to resist under international law. And yet, the international communities continue to overlook these systematic atrocities, if you like. And settler colonialism is what happened in places like Canada, the US, New Zealand, Australia, against the local indigenous people. And and yet these countries, sadly, are still backing the settler colonial state of Israel against the indigenous Palestinian people.
Yeah. So let's discuss a few specific massacres against the Palestinians so that we understand sort of the specifics of these actions. We mentioned in a previous episode a massacre in the village of Deir Yassin in April 1948, this is before the formation of the State of Israel, where over 200 Palestinian villages were brutally killed.
Yeah. And civilians were badly mutilated, raped, executed. And this happened throughout in other villages and towns. And it's important to note why Deir Yassin, the Deir Yassin massacre, is important because it's aimed to trigger mass fear and to speed up the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. So what happened was Zionist terror groups would go around from village to village, town to town, and informing Palestinians with loudspeakers saying that if you don't leave your homes and your villages and so on, the same will happen to you as what happened there, Yassin. So to put terror and fear and the Deir Yassin massacre, really, as well as other massacres, are very well documented, including in Israeli archives, and they kind of expel, and push out more and more Palestinians from their homes.
Yeah, and now the world is seeing the same tactics that started since the 1920s and have never really stopped being exposed in Gaza and the West Bank. Certainly, there's been a media blackout. Social media is not encouraged, but we've all seen images of rows of men, naked, stripped, handcuffed, and going to their deaths. But these massacres are not new to Palestinians or to Gaza. Can you give us, a couple more past examples? I know there are too many to list, so let's just hone in on a couple.
Yeah, so also not many people know on the 3rd of November 1956, the Zionist Israeli occupying forces committed a horrific massacre in Khan Yunis in Gaza, and with over 275 Palestinians brutally shot and killed in cold blood.
Yeah, and just to be clear on that, after this massacre, Palestinians unearthed a mass grave near Khan Yunis with bound bodies of 40 Palestinian men who were shot in the back of the head at point-blank range. So very clearly, not in combat, not in self-defense, a full-on massacre.
Yeah, very much so. And an Israeli soldier called Mark Geffen, who later became a journalist, said in his account that, I'll quote, I stopped at a corner and threw up. I couldn't get used to the sight of a human slaughterhouse.
Yeah. And Donald Neff, who was the Time magazine bureau chief in Israel for some time, cited over 270 people killed in that particular massacre.
Yeah. So, and a few weeks later, as if that wasn't enough, a few weeks later, on the 12th of November, 1956, also the Zionist Israeli occupying forces massacred around 101 Palestinians. And this was known as the Rafah massacre. And it included Palestinian refugees at the time. And over the 4 months period of clashes, if you like, over 1,200 Palestinians were brutally killed by the Zionist occupying forces as well.
Yeah, and this aim that you talked about to instill fear and to suppress Palestinian resistance is discussed in a Haaretz article, which is an Israeli newspaper from 2010, and it was done through looking at Joe Sacco's graphic novel, which had come out at that time about this massacre called Footnotes from Gaza.
Yeah. And the settler colonial project continues to this day to illegally land grab in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and while at the same time trying to subjugate the Palestinian people and who are really illegally occupied by the Zionists.
Yeah. Under international law and backed by numerous legal precedents, I just want to mention again that Palestinians do have the legal right to resist their occupation. It's
Yeah,
an illegal occupation.
yeah, and that's including the right to armed resistance as well.
Yeah. One more example. Let's mention the Gaza War, known as the Gaza War, which was not this one. This was from 2008 to 2009, and that resulted in about 1,400 Palestinians being killed and over 46,000 homes destroyed. So what is going on now is not new, it's just bigger in scale. And more than 100,000 people were made homeless at that time.
Yeah. And each of these killings actually show a pattern of indiscriminate violence and disregard to Palestinian lives.
And their basic human rights and dignity.
Yeah. And it's important that people understand what's happening to Palestinians has been happening for decades, really. It's nothing new. It's just people now are finding out more about it.
Yes, because there's enough interest that supersedes the PR. And Zionist terror groups have been conducting massacres, the forceful expelling of Palestinians throughout, from prior to the Nakba all through, and it's extremely well documented online for those who want to look up any of this information.
Yeah. And really, we're witnessing the use of starvation, continued mass arrests, mass detentions without charges, rape, discriminative bombings, mass killings, mass executions of Palestinians. But now it's all being broadcast live, if you like. And those being genocided, as we said before in another episode, are also and also by those who are committing the crimes are both broadcasting them, if you like. So those genocided and those committing the crimes, and those committing the crimes are bragging about their crimes. Really, it's a very immoral, for me, it's the most immoral army committing those atrocities and genocide about the Palestinian people.
Yeah, it's TikToking war crimes. If you haven't seen them, you should be aware of what's going on social media, because this stuff does not make BBC or CNN, and it really should, because it's awful. The definition of genocide under international law, just to be clear on this, includes the intent to destroy in part or in whole a group based on their ethnicity, nationality, race, or religion. And incitement to genocide is a crime all by itself. Now, the International Court of Justice has made it clear that the current Israeli regime, many of them have vocalized this intent. So it's not really up for debate. And many scholars, including prominent Israeli ones, have labeled these acts that are going on now as genocidal.
Mhm.
It's not only about the scale of the violence, is I guess what I'm trying to say, but also the intention behind it. And it's now been documented that the atrocities against Palestinians can be considered genocide, including from people like Amos Goldberg, an Israeli historian who specializes in the Holocaust, and many others.
Yeah. And really, with entire families and their entire bloodlines being sort of exterminated, sadly. Um, and also, this correlates with what the leaders of Israel are openly saying they want to do, to have a holy Jewish state, and where the indigenous Palestinian population would disappear.
Or being made to disappear.
Yeah.
And there's also this mass incarceration going on even now in the West Bank. But again, it's nothing new. Over time, over 1 million Palestinians have been arrested and detained by Israel, often without charge, often children, in the most appalling conditions, and often tortured. It's been ongoing as a tactic since the establishment of the State of Israel.
Yeah, and this genocide has to end. I mean, to save Palestine, but also to save our collective humanity, and also to end the illegal occupation of Palestine.
Yes, I agree with you, but it's not just you and me saying that. The ICJ, the International Courts of Justice, have set a deadline to end both the illegal occupation and illegal settlements, which are, built in the middle of occupied territory. Um, and that deadline is that both of those should end by September 2025. International law is crystal clear on this point, and it's the application of international law that becomes the issue, of course.
Yeah, but yet Western governments really aren't, and mainstream media, really, their coverage is perpetuating the Hasbara, which is the propaganda that's been going on for years and years.
But do you think, I mean, despite the legacy media, sort of gaslighting and not quite reporting on what's going on, it's young people who are informing themselves, who are motivated, who are choosing to vote or not vote. In the case, the last US election, taking the lead and speaking out and demanding action from their leaders against the genocide.
Yeah, not just words, really. They're taking action, and really action, big action is needed. There also, young people are using digital platforms to bring attention to these atrocities, making it harder for the world to ignore the ongoing human rights abuses and violations. And they're demanding an immediate end to the genocide in Gaza. So they're taking action and they're speaking out.
Yeah, which gives us a scrap of hope, and also the growing support from Jewish people who continue to distance themselves from Zionism, often at great personal cost, has been really incredible to see. Some truly wonderful, wonderful, interesting people. Hanan, is there hope? And what are your thoughts for a solution?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So, in my opinion, the brutal colonization and its cruelty is unsustainable. And the racist Zionist colony is slowly imploding, and it won't be around. It's just a matter of time. So, and as they say, none of us are free till all of us are free. So, really, in my opinion, the only solution is decolonization, and to have one state from the river to the sea with equal rights for everyone, regardless of race, religion, and with a multi-party system where Muslims, Christians, Jews, Druze, basically everyone can live together equally, and where everyone is protected under the law. And ironically, that's exactly how it used to be in Palestine before the formation of the Zionist project. So the implementation, and before the implementation of their racist laws and ideology.
Yeah, well, it might seem a far cry, but if you don't put it out there, it's never going to happen. So a democratic single state like like a bit like the Swiss Federation, maybe preserving the culture of every group. Nobody has to homogenize, but they're all equal under a federation.
Exactly. And very much needed. It's been done in other countries. I think Belgium have that and others. So it's doable and it has to happen.
Yeah, and why not?
Why not? And to be honest, Shamim, I mean, Jewish people are, they keep saying it's a safe place, but actually Jewish people have never been more safe, less safe than in the Zionist state of Israel.
Yeah, it's not looking like the best place to be for anybody currently. But it could be. And I think that, it's good to have a vision of something like that. I think people have been sold the idea of this two-state solution, even as that land for Palestinian on the Palestinian side shrinks to nothingness and has settlers put all over it. So it was obviously with kind of not a great will to actually make that succeed. Anyway, it's a beautiful vision. Let's keep hold of it. And as we wrap up today, our discussions are aimed at fostering understanding and promoting dialogue. So if you have something to comment, please do. And join us next time to discuss Lebanon in the next episode. Lebanon, of course, currently being bombarded by the Zionist state. If you enjoyed our talk, please like, subscribe, share it with your friends and family to help us spread the word. It's really important for us, and your support is so crucial and meaningful in bringing these important discussions to a bigger audience.
And
Our,
as
sorry.
sorry, go ahead, Shamim.
No, I was just going to
I
drivel on the
interrupted
same
you.
thing. Just say we want to be humanist on this podcast, and we appreciate your support.
And as always, we believe that stories matter and representation matters. And just to say a big thank you again for taking the time to watch. As Shamim said, remember to like, to share, to subscribe, and see you again very soon. Thank you.